In previous videos, we've covered each of these elements from the introduction through to the conclusion. Surely that means we're done. We've covered all of the elements of a paper, going from outlining the research question that we had in our introduction and the theoretical framework and literature review that underpinned it, through to describing how the work was conducted from a methodological perspective, and as well we covered our data analyses and all the components that come with that, then outlined the results, much like a tour guide, and then we put together our discussion hamburger, light on the beetroot. Then of course we included a conclusion at the end. So that means that we have ticked off all of these parts. Surely we are done. Well, I suppose it depends on your definition of done. There's a long way to go still. And one of the most important parts of a paper still outstanding: the abstract. The abstract, the part of the paper that is much more frequently read than any of these elements here. The title and abstract are the most frequently read components of papers. And if an abstract is poorly written or doesn't appear or doesn't capture the content of a paper appropriately, well, it can limit the uptake of research. Contrary to what the name suggests, an abstract is not some loosely written, sort of vaguely interpretative piece of work, much like an abstraction in terms of an artistic point of view, or an argumentative abstraction. Rather, an abstract is something that we have taken away or taken from the work itself. It's bounded by the realistic limits of the paper itself. In many respects, it's a summary of the very clear components of the paper that it's representing. So rather than being an abstraction, that is a departure from the literature descriptions offered in the paper, it is an abstract, a takeaway, a deduction, and a synthesis, a summary of the piece of work as it exists. So an abstract outlines or provides a summary of the paper, the research that was conducted, and in some respects it should be like a movie trailer for your paper or for the paper in general. Now, we've all, I suppose, at some stage seen a movie trailer that doesn't properly represent the content of the movie itself. There are some movies out there, for example, Star Wars Rogue One, have very famous scenes that never appeared in the movie. Don't appear in the movie for all sorts of reasons. Famously, Rogue One was partially reshot. Now, an abstract should not do that. It shouldn't include elements that are not present in the paper, but it also shouldn't skate over very important components that are covered by the paper. So you should highlight, or an abstract should highlight the major points. That is, it needs to bring out that major issue, the theoretical framework. Not in the long form, but it needs to provide, in one, maybe two sentences, the founding principle for the piece of work itself. Then briefly outline the methods, the key results, and the interpretations, the implications that flow from those results in the discussion. So all of the elements of the paper, those sections, drawn together into one single, simple summary. The message at the end should be to the researcher or the reader as they're reading it. You should be left with one, a clear summary of what is in the paper, but a clear indication why you should care about it, why you should read the rest of it. Bearing in mind that papers are generally of the 5,000 to 6,000 word mark, and an abstract of the couple of hundred word marks. There's an increase in the order of magnitude of effort that's involved. So an abstract needs to help the reader understand why that order of magnitude should be invested. And the abstract itself needs to be legible, understandable to a wide audience. Now, we're not talking about every person off the street. We're talking about a wide audience in that research field. So, what does an abstract include? As I've already outlined, it includes a condensed theoretical framework. In doing so, it not only provides the background for why the paper was done, but also covers the research question that's being addressed, why it's important. The methods are very, very briefly outlined. The key findings are presented, a conclusion based upon those findings, and perhaps how those findings sit in a broader context. So really what we have is the why the study was conducted, what was done, what was found, and what it meant and why it was important. How does that sort of come together? Well, here is a sort of totally synthetic example of the way that it might come together. So, for example, we might have a theoretical framework in our introduction that covers a detailed description of a species, of its endangered status and how little we know about it and why that's important. All the important elements that would describe a key knowledge gap in the literature. Now, we wouldn't go through restating all of that again, but we might simply say that understanding of some species attribute is important, one, because it's critically endangered, but also because very, very little is known about a particular attribute of its life history. Now, you might not know anything about Burramus parvis, but Burramus parvis is a small possum that lives in the high mountains here in Australia, and during winter the females overwinter inside rock screes underneath the snow, that is in sub-Nevian spaces. Now, very little is known about that, and only recently did researchers discover that during winter the females don't sleep all winter long. They wake up in the middle of the night, much like the rest of us. Maybe we wake up in the middle of the night, we're thirsty, we have a drink, we go back to sleep. That's what the female Burramus parvis do. And so just by understanding what the females are doing during winter, the authors then developed a model to explain the possible distribution of females based upon the distance from running water from their subnivean space. The subnivean space needs to be dry because that's where they bring up their young. But the female still needs access to water so that she can replenish her water supply and continue to provide milk to her babies. So we might put forward that argument in our introduction, but there's no way we're going to recount all of that in an abstract. We summarise it down to the broad nub. Well, we don't know anything about overwintering, and it's an important element of their life history. How did we do it? Well, we put little collars on these animals. Now, this is not something I actually did, right? But this is how work is conducted. We put collars on them to track them. Now, there are all sorts of things that might need to be explained about those collars and where the animals were, how they were captured, how they were handled, how they were then measured, and how the data were analysed. All of that stuff is embedded in there, but all of that methodology, the description about how and why the methods were conducted, that's in the methods section. Here, we're just giving a brief overview of the raw, basic elements of what was done. Then, in terms of the results, we highlight what were significant outcomes. Now, this example is missing something. It says here significant and doesn't include a p or an alpha value. That should be reported in the abstract as well as anywhere else. And then at the end, there needs to be why does this matter component? What does this mean in the context of, one, the research question, and two, where do we go to from here? So you need to have all of those elements. When you read your paper, you need to be looking for these 4 things. The why, the what, and the what. You know, it'd be good if it was a how, what, why, blah, 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 but it doesn't work out that way. So why was the study conducted? What was done? What was found? What does it mean? Look for those 4 elements in your paper. Now, if you're tasked with writing a paper and you have to write an abstract because of it, how do you go about it? Well, writing an abstract is a relatively simple process. I'm going to jump to the end here. Often the way that an abstract can come together is if your paragraphs are written appropriately, that is, your paragraphs throughout your entire paper, use a topic sentence and then the rest of the paragraph fleshes out that argument. Many times you can just pull out the topic sentence from every paragraph, put that into one paragraph, and that becomes your draft abstract. And from there, you then edit it and whittle it down so that it becomes something appropriate. You achieve 2 things. It is to the point and it covers the entire paper. Now, to whittle it down, there are a couple of key things to focus on. One, it's best to use an active voice, often first person. Again, that issue of first person writing, something that's worth thinking about taking up. The abstract is written in past tense about things we have done. And we try to keep the sentences short. A common misstep made by student writing is that too many clauses are presented in each sentence. Each sentence should have one key argument. So keep the sentences short. A way to do that is to cut out these junk words like therefore, however, contrastingly, blah, blah. It is interesting to note all of that kind of stuff. Cut them out. Your writing does not need it. It is always the case that if you are writing interestingly, or it is worth noting that, blah, 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 you know, if it wasn't worth noting, don't write it, okay? The only things that go into a paper are the things that are interesting and worthwhile noting. Otherwise, it shouldn't be there in the first place. Stating that something is interesting is irrelevant. It's a wasted word. Get rid of those things. In general, an abstract is a single paragraph, but bear in mind, in some journals, the journals require that the abstract is broken down into separate components so that there is a clear, separate introductory sentence or 2, clear methods, results, and discussion sections. In general, an abstract is short. A typical abstract, when presented, say, at a conference or for a journal, is in the order of, say, 250 words. But more commonly, you can expect an abstract to be in the 500 or 600 word range, bearing in mind that a paper is often 10 times that length. The major themes presented in the paper should be there. Of course, the major theme presented in the paper is given to the reader by the theoretical framework. That should be there, and as a consequence, everything that flows from that theoretical framework, the methods, the results, all of that should be very, very clearly presented in the abstract. Of course, the focus should be entirely on the research that was conducted. Nothing superfluous. It really needs to be a directed piece of writing. And there needs to be enough information for a reader to make an assessment about whether they want to read or should read the rest of the paper. Now, if you want more content focused on abstracts, this is a great website to visit. This Absolutely Maybe blog is run by the Public Library of Science online, and you can see the link here. I've put the link for this on the academic writing and research critique page for you to have a look at. things that the abstract shouldn't do. You shouldn't feel like running and hiding or, totally worn out or confused after you've read an abstract. So there shouldn't be an overly lengthy background or set of context. It should be delivered in a short, pithy argument, a real distillation of the theoretical framework. The paper should be described, but only the paper. There shouldn't be anything that goes outside the scope of the paper that is presented subsequently. Sometimes abstracts include abbreviations, sort of shorthand for the metrics that were measured, but those abbreviations should not be there without any explanation. Ideally, we aim to avoid any use of jargon in writing in general, and this is one place where it's a big no-no. For the most part, abstracts do not include references or in-text citations. The only exception to that is if the paper's aim was to explore or test the ideas put forward by another single paper. In fact, I've written one of those in the past that was focused on a paper written by George Kuzera. You shouldn't use ellipticals, and in fact, I hate the use of ellipticals. I cannot stand writing that uses inverted commas to imply perhaps a sarcastic or an ironic meaning associated with a word. Frankly, if an author cannot say what they mean with plain, clear English, they need to take themselves outside and have a good hard look at themselves. If you want to use irony, if you want to use sarcasm, become a stand-up comic. Don't write research papers. It is unconstructive. Nobody knows what you mean. If you put inverted commas around a word, what you are implying is that the word you are using should not be interpreted in the literal sense in which it is presented. So what is a reader supposed to take from that? Who knows? Because the idea, the meaning is not clearly conveyed. Avoid ellipticals. Always. Especially in emails to me. I hate them. Generally, abstracts also exclude an image. There is an exception here. And that is in some journals. The Australian Journal of Ecology, or Austral Ecology it is now often encourages graphical abstracts and little cartoony drawings to go along with the written abstract. Now, I've published in journals that have graphical abstracts, and frankly, by the time I get to the point where I've written the abstract, I'm in no mood to write or draw a cartoon. Maybe I need to rediscover my sense of humour, but frankly, the message from me to the reader needs to be clear enough in what is written on the page to be given to the reader by the words themselves. And that is partially because I never ever use ellipticals. But the writing needs to be clear so that an image is not required. So what should you be looking for in the abstracts in your papers? The paper must, as you know, include a clear framework, a clear theoretical framework presented in the introduction, and that clear framework needs to flow throughout the entire paper. If then the abstract is a distillation of the entire paper, then the abstract itself must be a distillation of that theoretical framework. You should see from the start to the end of that abstract a clear theoretical framework that leads you to why the study was conducted, what was done, what was learned, and how we can understand the research question in the context of that piece of work. That must be there, and that's what you should be looking for. And that's it. That's academic papers done. Isn't it? Oh, hang on. Yeah, titles. They have a title. What should a title be? How does a title clearly and genuinely reflect the research framework and a key outcome? Well, there is no recorded content focused on titles as part of this recorded content focused on academic writing. Why not? Well, because we're going to discuss titles in a prac in the second half of the course. I'm going to get you to bring in your papers, and we're going to talk through how titles might be written, how they are written, and how they can be improved.